Hi, this is Meg Kelly. Welcome to the Veganic Summit. We're taking a tour today of Jimmy Videle's Veganic Farm, which was filmed in July to show you at the height of the season. And he's going to be sharing how you can work with biodiversity in order to have a more abundant farm or more abundant garden that acts as an oasis for all species. So welcome, and I hope you enjoy the tour.
Hello everybody, welcome to La Ferme de l'Aube. I am Jimmy Videle and we are here on a beautiful July afternoon, blue sky, in the middle of our green peas and our scarlet runner beans. And today we're going to be talking about the no spray philosophy and making your growing space, your garden, your farm a haven for all life. A lot of this information can actually be found in the Veganic Grower's Handbook that I wrote. That is also going to be available during the Veganic Summit. So welcome everybody, and we're very, very happy to discuss everything to do with making your garden be a space where everyone thrives. Since 2014, we have never sprayed any kind of insecticide at all. Now, obviously, we wouldn't even consider using anything conventional, but in organic farming, as we were certified organic as well as being certified veganic or certified stock-free, there is a possibility that we could have used organically approved pesticides like pyrethrin-based or chrysanthemum-based pesticides. But what we felt is that destroyed the entire biodiversity that we were trying to create by planting vast varieties of native flowers or cultivated flowers, or just in general having our farm. So we wanted to think about the system in a way where we weren't spraying at all, so we didn't at all. And what has happened over that time is now we have seen the diversity of insects come in and be able to manage themselves with the diversity of flowers that we have, with the diversity of plants that we have, growing over 150 to 200 different kinds of varieties of flowers and vegetable crops for ourselves. We have been able to now see the insect community in balance with its natural environment. So the no spray philosophy, the veganic approach, since I am the LEED certified, our first certified veganic, it is something that we implemented as being our baseline so that when we do have our gardens, we are not destroying it by putting any kind of sprays. And that can even be things like garlic pepper spray, which we think might be benign. And we'll talk about that a little bit later, about how even those little kind of formulations that we could create to take care of some insect problems could actually be detrimental to our gardens. And we'll show you all the techniques that we use to manage without spraying at all. Some people use garlic pepper spray to try to mediate, try to give a chance for something like the kale to grow against crop-eating insects like aphids. Aphids can become a big problem in kale, especially when there's a high nitrogen component in the soil, or at even different times of year, growing under cover, things like this. So some people will use garlic pepper spray. When we spray anything, garlic pepper spray for example, it won't entirely decimate the entire population of aphids. But what it will do is it might eliminate it to the point where all of the insects who you might attract into eating the aphids will move on to another place. So it's interesting when you think about really all insecticide use, 99% of the time, they don't destroy every crop damaging insect that's on the kale. But they're going to make it so that the predators, when they come, they don't want to be there because there's not enough to them to feed on. It's not that we want to have a kale full of aphids. It's more that when the aphids show up, the predators come right behind them and take care of the problem for you. When you spray, you damage the insect population to the point where the predators move on to another place. We don't even know where they go. And we really don't even know what the impact is of all the spraying that we do, except that when I walk into a field or to a garden that they do spray anything, even the garlic pepper spray, you notice that the diversity of insects is quite low. I mean, you see them all around me now. As I'm picking up the kale, they're bouncing off. This is what you want in your gardens. And this is one of the reasons why the no spray philosophy actually works, because the kale is quite healthy. The Ferme de l'Aube has been in existence since 2014. My wife Melanie and I were fortunate to be able to buy this place. We're in a small hamlet, small town, municipality called Boileau, Quebec. It's equidistant between Montreal and Ottawa. So Montreal is to the east, Ottawa is to the west. We're here about 200 meters above the level of the sea. Our seasons are quite cold. Our summer season is quite cold. Actually, a couple nights ago, it got down to 5 or 40 degrees Fahrenheit or 5 degrees Celsius. But it's a lovely place to grow, and we have wonderful summers like we're having this year. We've had a lot of rain in the beginning of the year, but now it's starting to dry out. And as you can tell, the pumpkins are thriving. The buckwheat behind us, which we'll be discussing a lot today, as buckwheat is one of those wonderful cover crops that attracts all sorts of insects, not just pollinators, which are obviously really, really important for the pumpkins or the butternut squash that we have, or the cucumbers or the zucchini that are all kind of in this general area, but also for all sorts of other insects also that will predate on some of the insects that decide that they want to eat our crops. Because even though that it's true that about 97% or so, or 98% of all the insects that exist on the planet really don't do anything to the vegetable crops that we want to eat. They're just there. They live symbiotically. They decide to live there because it's something that they wish to do, because insects, just like all other animals, are sentient. The 2% or 3% that are damaging to our crops can be very, very damaging. So what we attempt to do is to create a system where they are, even the ones that want to eat our crops, are in balance with the plants that we're growing. But then there are other creatures that decide that they're going to use those to nourish their own families. So in essence, veganic gardening isn't really about animals not eating animals, because the insect world does. Yet, this is how nature works. So what we're trying to mimic and imitate is understanding how nature works and providing all the habitat and diversity necessary so that those crop damaging insects do not just eat our crops, but actually just hang out there instead. Okay, so one of the creatures who does a lot of work in our gardens, especially in our potatoes, as you see, there's a lot of holes in our potatoes. So in our potatoes, we have insects like flea beetles, which are very problematic. There are spider mites, which are problematic. But this little fly is called a long-legged fly, and she is actually a predator fly. And what she is doing is she is looking on the overside of the leaf for anything sticky, so then she can go to the underside of the leaf to go eat all the little spider mites that eat our plants. Or the flea beetle, which is there. So this is our potato patch. We've grown in the past, we're now a homestead. In the past we used to be a farm, so we used to grow up to 12 50-foot rows of potatoes for our CSA members, our community supported agriculture members, our kiosks that we would do, or also our farmers market. But now, since it's just for us and our families, we only grow 4 50-foot rows of potatoes, which is quite manageable, even though 12 rows is quite manageable also. So when we grow potatoes, they always grow quite lush in the beginning of the season, and with the warming of the temperatures, they're nice and green, they're happy. Well, as the season gets warm, the insects start coming in that like to chew on our plants. As you see, our plants aren't without holes. They obviously do have holes in them. Some of those holes are from flea beetles when the plants are a little smaller. And then as the leaf grows and as the plant grows, the leaf hole just gets bigger. And I see the flea beetles there. They usually are pervasive in times of of dry temperature. They seem to prefer also cold temperatures. But anyway, we showed a picture earlier of a long-legged fly, and that long-legged fly is going to help take care of that problem for us. One of the reasons why, if we were to spray our potato patch with an organically proved insecticide like Entrust, it would decimate the population of probably the fly. It wouldn't really do much to the flea beetles, except they would bounce off and find another place to be. Maybe it would kill a few, but the flies might also be affected, and then they would leave, and then they wouldn't help take care of the problem for us. But the biggest problem in potatoes that probably everybody in North America has is the Colorado potato beetle. This in my hand is a Colorado potato beetle larva. The Colorado potato beetle is a very, very striking black and white beetle, kind of robust looking, with like an orange face with polka dots. She's actually quite pretty. They overwinter in everywhere the potatoes are grown. So a lot of agronomists will tell you, okay, if you grow potatoes, you need to get rid of all your plants, you need to burn all the plants, you need to dispose of them out of your gardens. Our philosophy on that as veganic growers, and part of our insect management system, is that we feel that if you leave the plants there as long as possible, yes, you are going to have overwintering Colorado potato beetles, but you're also going to have overwintering Colorado potato beetle predators that are going to also stick around. Now, they don't just overwinter, they also migrate in, so it's kind of a dual problem. In the beginning of spring, after we plant the potatoes, so kind of, actually it's middle spring, about early May, come about early June, we start seeing the first adult Colorado potato beetles, and those are the ones that have wintered over. They're going to come, they're going to work the plants, and they're going to find a mate, and they're going to lay their eggs on the underside of the leaves. So pretty much as soon as the plants get basically this size, we'll start walking the field of potatoes, or the plantation of potatoes, every day, looking for those adults. And really, all we do now is we just pick them off and cast them aside. We have quite a wonderful wild patch of native flora. We've planted in some alfalfa in there. It used to be one of our farm fields that we have now just let go back to the wild. And so we'll just throw the larvae in there, and there'll probably be some predators in there. We don't need to squish them, even though some people do. Theoretically, it could be considered a veganic practice, though it's just as easy just to grab them, pick them off, put them in your hand, say hello, walk away with them, and just cast them into the wilds. Somebody will eat them if they need to, or they'll find something else that they would like to live on. What we don't understand about Colorado potato beetles is, do they live on any other plants? We know that they do like ground cherries. We know that they do like eggplants. I've actually seen them in tobacco, which is kind of all the same family, the Solanaceae family, like potatoes. So maybe if there's a wild Solanaceae, which I don't think there is, but if there was, maybe they would eat that. But then maybe, just maybe, the Colorado potato beetles the larvae will decide to eat on something else, and maybe they will even adapt to eat something wild instead of our crops. This is all the conjecture of the interesting part of just letting the insect cycle live instead of just spraying. Oh no, I have insects, we need to spray. No, it's more about just letting it, just waiting to see what's going to happen. Obviously, there are some bigger problems than others, but Colorado potato beetle for a lot of people is a very, very big problem. But for us, the way that we manage it, by just picking them off, has worked wonders for us. And of all the crops that we grow, although we almost never get a 100% loss of any crop, potatoes are the one crop we always rely on, and we always have enough to have all the way through the summertime, the fall, into the winter. And I still have potatoes from last year that we're still eating. Here we are in July, and I'm going to harvest in 2 weeks. So now we're in our bean patch. To my left over here, we have our black turtle black beans that I've been cultivating for 27 years, the same seeds, seed saving year after year after year. Here in my hand with these beautiful white flowers are the Maxibel green beans that we eat fresh as green beans. This was actually given to me by a grower here in Boileau when we tried to have a little sort of seed festival, seed explanation on how to seed seeds and sale at our municipality. He came with these seeds that he had been saving for 20 years. So now we've been growing them since 2016. So it's been almost 30 years that they've been in cultivation by growers. And then behind us we have, or to my right, we have scarlet runner beans, which are exceptionally popular with hummingbirds and all sorts of other pollinators because of the wonderful showy red flowers. We still do buy some seed, but we also do save our own, only because the pods, it takes them a really long time to dry. But the reason why we're in the bean patch is because when we're talking about insects and about this sort of no spray philosophy, sometimes it's best not to look at our fields and say, oh my gosh, what kind of problems am I going to have? There's going to be so many insects, or what do I do about all the insects? Well, not every crop species have problems with insects, depending on where you live. But the one that I've never seemed to have really any problems at all with are beans. The dry beans, you can look at the leaves, even though they can be affected by flea beetles, or they can be affected by blister beetles or Mexican bean beetles, depending where you live in the world. In both northern Arizona, where my first farm was, and here in central Quebec or southern Quebec, but quite a bit higher in latitude, we have beans that have no insect damage at all. So just to say that when we're looking at our gardens, maybe we also can look at the fact that it's not just about what the insects are going to eat, but what the insects are avoiding. Now, I'm not really sure 100% why they're not being attacked by anything, other than it has been said in farming and growing circles that the healthier the plants are, the more balanced that the soil is, the more diversity that you have, the less problems that you're going to have. Maybe that's exactly why we don't have the issues that some other farmers have. Now, we're also not a monoculture farm, even when we were. I mean, this is a 50-foot row, but if you look at it, we almost have no space to crouch in. There is still even some native flora growing in the pathways. There's always living roots. Even though we will weed and pull these out, the roots systems of the native flora system still exists. There are native flora growing in the beans themselves, even though we do try to keep a pretty good job of trying to keep them de-weeded, simply because here in Boileau, Quebec, our biggest issue, as every gardener is going to have a biggest issue, our biggest issue is with humidity issues. And being that we have big humidity issues, we want to try to keep where we're trying to grow our food as weed-free as possible as that can be. But anyway, since this is about insects and not about humidity, I'm not entirely sure why. They're beautiful, but they are, and it just goes to show that, well, maybe the no spray philosophy is even working on the plants that don't have issues at all. So here we have striped cucumber beetles that are actually mating, that are quite a big problem in all of our cucurbit family. So in your cucumbers, in your winter squashes, in your pumpkins, in your melons, in your zucchini. And these are a species of insects that a lot of organic farmers will spray for, because they can be very, very damaging to actually get inside of the flowers before they open, and they like to eat out the male parts of the flower. So then in the end, the male part of the flower is not viable to pollinate by the pollinators when they fly by. But by not spraying for them and letting their life cycle roll and understanding, they are very pervasive right in the beginning of the season. And we plant all of our cucurbits in about mid-June, and we plant late. And we plant late for that exact reason, because there is a flush of these insects that migrate in. They don't overwinter, they migrate in. And there's a flush of these insects that come in. And if they do not see the plant that they want, so when we plant them, we cover with a row cover that will basically exclude them, which is one of the practices that we use in veganic farming. It's called an exclusionary practice, and we use a couple, both an insect screen for our brassicas, which we're going to talk about next, and our cucurbits, we use the row cover. That's to keep the plants warm, because cucurbits really like high temperature and high humidity, and to keep out these little guys, because when the plants are small, they can become really damaging. But what we notice is when the plants get bigger, as they are now, the leaves are huge of the zucchini, of the pumpkins, and again, they've only been growing for a little over a month. Like, we really haven't even started yet. They're there, but they don't do much. They don't do much at all. And we think it's because of our timing that we use for planting. Now, if we decided that we were trying to beat the season, like and we do this in farming a lot, we want to plant our zucchinis really early, like before the last frost, maybe the first week of May, just so that we can have zucchini really early. Well, when you cover for your cucurbits, as soon as they start flowering, which we have the flowers, you want to open up the screen or the row cover so that the pollinators can get in to pollinate the flowers for you, so that you can actually get the fruit. But if you do that, then also those little guys come in, the cucumber beetles come in, and they will start eating your plants. And usually at that point, early in the season, your plants are a lot smaller, and they'll start eating your flowers, and they will even eat the plants. Another problem that growers have, that we have only had 1 year, last year, is squash vine borer. And this is a really big problem with a lot of growers. And I haven't talked about this a lot because we don't have the problem. But the squash vine borer, the eggs will get laid by the moth, and the larva will travel down the stem and start eating the inside of the stem, and basically rot out the entire main stem of all of your cucurbit family. Last year, we tried, because we had the problem, and even though I was told this would absolutely not work, we decided to leave all of our cucurbits on the field. And all of our cucurbits, as you can see, they're straw to guard the moisture underneath, because again, cucurbits like a lot of humidity. But pulling back the straw, you'll see how nice and wet and rich the soil is. It's beautiful crumbly clay loam soil. So we keep the straw there, and we do that to guard the humidity of the soil, but also to when the pumpkins, in this case pumpkins, grow, they're not actually growing on dirt itself or soil itself. They're actually going to grow on the straw, which will keep them from being damaged by earthworms that like to eat the pumpkins, or slugs, which actually will decide that they want to eat the younger squash, or at least chew on it a little bit. So the squash vine borer, that's what they'll do. They'll go ahead and eat out that entire stem. They'll rot out your plant. It's a big problem, especially for people down in the northeast part of the United States, even in Ontario. It's pervasive. People don't know what to do about it. So what we did last year, since we had the problem, is we decided to leave everything there. Not only did we leave all the plants there over winter with the same philosophy as the potatoes, which being that there is someone that eats the larva or the overwintering larva of the squash vine borer. Absolutely, there's somebody who eats him. So we decided to leave all the plant residue there, and reuse the straw from last year's planting and put it on this New Year's planting, in the belief that if there was a squash vine borer, there would also be the predator that was eating the squash vine borers. This year we haven't had them. They do not exist. Don't know, I mean, after 1 year, it's not really a good research test. I can't really tell you whether it's functioning or not, but it does hold my philosophy, the same with the Colorado potato beetle, that and this is a huge principle, it's a huge principle in insect management on any growing space, leave all your plants to decompose on your beds. Do not clean your beds at the end of the year. Let everything decompose there. chances are pretty good at in the spring the following year, only maybe there's only 25% of the actual plant left. Even if there's more, then you rake it out to replant, or even better, just move it out of the way, depending on what your plant variety is, and then you can plant right on top of it. But in this case of the squash, we think that this is why we're able to mitigate the squash vine borers. And the cucumber beetles, again, we don't spray. They do a little damage, not even. I don't really even see it. Even all the flowers look pretty good. We planted even later this year for that reason. And things are looking great without any spraying at all. We put plastic down because we don't have all the manpower or woman power or person power to be able to weed all of our fields all the time, especially when they're not in cover crop. So as you can see, if you look sort of to your left, we have like a succession of buckwheat, and we plant some earlier, and then a couple weeks later we'll plant again the buckwheat. We do this so that when we open the rest up here in a few weeks to replant more buckwheat or oats, depending on what we decide, we're not competing with a lot of native flora pressure. I mean, this is what's called couch grass, and it is a big problem everywhere. I know it's a big problem in the UK, and the thing is about couch grass is that when you pull some out, see if I can get a nice bunch, the root systems, they travel further and further, and all of these root systems, you can actually see, will actually become another grass and another grass and another grass. And with couch grass, if you let it go into your beds or you let it go into your fields, you can have the main plant here 3 feet on, you can have a root system where it's just creating more and more couch grass. I don't mind the couch grass here. It's fine. It can live in the green strips where, you know, there's an insect life and there's all sorts of other things going on. It can live. I mean, basically what couch grass is a wild rye. It's a wild grain, and the birds love it when it goes to seed. We have some of it going to seed in our wild patch, and the birds will go crazy with the seed pods, especially the migrating birds coming down. So it is a very important wild flora, but it's impossible to manage if you let it go. So we do use the plastic. I wish we had a better system, but being that even this size garden is too big for 2 people to manage, well, we do use this, but then we fold it up, put it to the side, and we'll plant again our buckwheat. So now we are actually in the buckwheat patch. We planted this about 45 days ago. It is now in full flower. It's tall. I mean, a lot of it is almost 5 feet tall. Buckwheat is one of our favorite attractors of all insect species. Not just pollinators like the wasp, who's flying around kind of my right hand, who is a pollinator as well as is a predator, actually a dual species insect for our purposes is necessary, or for their purposes, which is probably more appropriate. But the buckwheat has these really tiny flowers, so it really attracts big bumblebees, attracts big wasps, attracts small wasps, it attracts hoverflies, which are also, or I think it's called a syrphid fly, which are also a wonderful pollinator. It attracts the long-legged flies that we've already talked about, because within the buckwheat there are for sure little mites or little flea beetles that are in there that they would like to eat. So the primary purpose of planting buckwheat is to continue the diversity. Now, it's not just about diversity all at one time, and this is really, really important. We plant buckwheat 45 days ago, then we plant it 2.5 weeks later, then we plant it again 2 weeks later after that. The reason is because we want to have flowering plants through as much of the growing season as possible. And by doing that, it gives the insect population everything that they need all the time. Because not every insect is going to want to be on the buckwheat. Maybe it's going to want to be in the rudbeckia, or maybe it's going to want to be in the scarlet runner beans. As long as they have something flowering all the time. So as a tip, for anybody who has their home garden space, or even a smaller farm space or a homestead space or whatever, think about your growing situation so that some plant is flowering all the way from the time that you start basically cultivating. And for us, that would be like comfrey and dandelions, which we let go wild, which all flower in early May. We just let them go. A lot of people like to rip them out. People do that because they think that, well, if they don't, then there'll be more seeds, there'll be more dandelions. And that's great. You want more dandelions because dandelions are such a wonderful food source for the bumblebee queens that then need it to go into their burrows to make their babies, then come up again in late July, which they're here now, to start pollinating our cucurbit crops. So the point of buckwheat is to grow it for its flowers, for the pollinators, and for all other insect species that want to live in it. But it's also considered a nutrient miner. It takes up phosphorus from deep into the soil, and when it dies at the end of the season and it falls down, well, there is a source of phosphorus in its roots. So within that soil, there's those phosphorus elements that bind with the soil, that when you plant something, which all plants will require phosphorus at some point during their lifetimes to develop really, really strong root systems, the phosphorus is there. So buckwheat will bring up phosphorus, also other micronutrients. It creates flowers that attract beneficial insects, as well as the predated upon insects, which the predator insects want. So it really pretty much is a first full circle plant for our farm. So we have a native, non-native lamb's quarters, and we were talking about aphids earlier. Again, it's not that our fields don't have them, but this is a great example of using a native or wild flora, is just a better way of calling it, crop as a trap crop for black. This is probably a black form of a gray aphid, which are very, very, very pervasive, as you can see in Megan's hand. They will just suck the life out of this plant. However, this plant is going to thrive just fine because lamb's quarter doesn't seem to be affected. But if those little guys or girls or people show up on our brassicas, for example, like our kale that we've already talked about, well, we would have quite a bit of problem. But there's something working in the kale that's making sure that we don't have this problem. But they all are deciding to live here. And we find this quite often with other insect species also that are very pervasive, like Japanese beetles, which are a non-native coming over from Japan, that have attacked fruit trees and fruit orchards throughout Canada and the United States for probably over the last decade. I just talked to a veganic grower friend over in Ontario at Kindly Farms who was telling me all about them and how they've devastated her cherry trees. Well, for us, by letting a lot of our property as well as farming space go wild, where we have the trembling aspens, and then we have the baby trembling aspens. If we do get Japanese beetles, that's what they flock to, because it's very similar to what they were eating in Japan. I mean, it is very similar to maybe a young cherry tree also, not these tall ones, but in a way, that's what they prefer. They will go on to our orchard crops and our fruit crops, but these are the plants we prefer. So as an insect management, as a prevention, as a mitigation approach, what I suggested to my friend Nancy over there at Kindly Farms was to see if she could find little saplings of poplar or aspen and plant them within her orchard spaces. Maybe the Japanese beetles would congregate and flock to that instead. Just like we plant trap crops for aphids, or we have naturally wild occurring trap crops like we saw with the lamb's quarters and the gray aphids. I think that this is something that we can benefit in all of our spaces. So diversity, again, will prove that everything works. And within the lamb's quarter, here we have another long-legged fly who is going to be doing what? Well, eating aphids. Okay, so now we're in basically our 3 somewhat rows of brassicas, and you'll see that there is insect screen, very, very small whole insect screen on all of the brassica patch. And I'll actually leave this on all year while they're growing. Brassicas are very attractive, as I've said already, to aphids. We've talked about flea beetles, but there's one really pervasive, and it's actually the most destructive insect on the entire planet, and that's the cabbage moth. The cabbage moth creates something like, I think the number was $70 billion worth of loss worldwide every year in basically brassica family. Probably other crops too, but they're primarily on cabbages, broccolis. Here we have our Chinese cabbage. You can see again that it's not without holes. This is the flea beetles that are a lot less with the insect screen on than if it was off. But by keeping this screen on, what the cabbage moth does, it's a very pretty white moth or butterfly, and she flies over the brassicas, lands pretty much right in the middle, and deposits her eggs. And she won't just do it on one. It's amazing how many eggs she has. She'll put them in every single plant. So if your brassica plants are exposed, the cabbage moth will lay her eggs in there, and when the larvae hatch, they'll just basically eat the growing tip of the brassica. And by doing so, we'll damage it. Sure, the leaves are edible, but that's not really the point of why we grow Chinese cabbage. We want that nice, beautiful vase-like head with the white ribs and nice and crunchy and full of water. So by leaving the insect screen on all year long, she can't get on. She can't lay her eggs. It's impossible for her to do so, and you can get a nice head of Chinese cabbage, or of broccoli, or of cauliflower, or of regular cabbage, and we do this all throughout their life system here. There are other techniques you can use other than just planting screen, and we do those also, which is we do a staggered planting, or what's called succession planting. And a succession planting would be that we plant early cabbage, but then 3 weeks later we'll plant another sort of cabbage. And then we'll plant our first broccolis and cauliflowers, but to mitigate any loss that we possibly could have from, say, the flea beetles, if they're just too pervasive for that period of time because they really like dry temperature, don't really prefer it when it's wet, or gray worms, which is another one. It's called a cutworm in some places, which will basically eat the stems off. We go ahead and replant our little seedlings in another succession. So in the end of all of our brassicas, if you look at it as an entire family of vegetables, we'll have 5 successions of brassicas, from our kale to our cabbage, to our other cabbage, to our broccoli, to our cauliflower, to our Chinese cabbage, to more kale, to more broccoli, to more cauliflower. And that will ensure us that we're getting all of those wonderful brassica families in our diets, which probably all of us, for a really decreased risk of cancer and cardiovascular disease, we should be eating our brassicas every day. Our 25-foot by 50-foot passive solar greenhouse. This is where we grow all of our seedlings for everything that we plant down in our gardens. We start about the second week of March. The seedling season runs until about the last week of June. All of our tables will be filled with little seedlings, all of our tomato seedlings and peppers and hot peppers. And we even start our corn in trays with our veganic potting soil, just because it's just easier to get things to germinate in our cold climates. And then after that, we do plant a few things so we can harvest early. Things are starting to deteriorate with the hot temperatures, but we still have some beans climbing and some of our cherry tomatoes and our slicing tomatoes. And you'll see even that we have our patch of greens that we just kind of let go wild. It's really our philosophy of everything, because even in a greenhouse, which is kind of a more closed system. I mean, you can control basically everything. You can control the water, you can control the amount of heat, you can control about of light even if you put lights. We still know that there are friends living in here. We have toads that live in here. We have small frogs that live in here. Obviously, we have an insect population that lives here. So even in a closed system, we want to create a diversity so that all of the beings can just be taken care of by other beings. And then again, we don't have to use any kind of spraying at all. So this is a Japanese beetle. I've mentioned this before. They are very, very, very pervasive in orchards. A non-native species that has just become rampant. But for us, they're there, but they really prefer to be on, gosh, she's beautiful. They really prefer to be on the aspens or the poplars or on the white birch seedlings. Woo, she's there again. But she is actually she's working the plants for whatever she wants to eat. Now, she is a beetle, so maybe she's going to eat the plants, or maybe she's also looking for aphids, but there's one, so there's not really something we worry about. And even if there was 10, we still wouldn't worry about it. So I'm standing in our medicinal herb and flower garden. We took a lot of time figuring out what we wanted to grow in here based on pollinators, based on insect diversity, based also on having enough plants that create enough foliage for animals like mice and for shrews and for voles, but also for toads and frogs, because the toads and the frogs will take care of our slug problems. We don't really have a lot of slug problems, and we've learned recently that slugs are predated on by a firefly larva. So it's possible, because we have a ton of fireflies here in southern Quebec, it's very possible that has mitigated the problems we should have with slugs, because we're very humid, we're very wet. There's no reason why the slugs shouldn't be on our lettuces or on our plants or anything that's nice and leafy green, but they're just not here. So maybe it's that, but it's possible also that it's because of the vast amphibian population that we have of toads and frogs. But the interesting thing about an urban flower garden is that within it you have plants that flower all the time. Now we're basically in our peak flower diversity in here, but there have been flowers that have been flowering in here earlier, things like chives, plants like lamb's ear, but now I'm standing next to agastache, which is also called Korean mint, or a type of agastache called Korean mint, which is just a fantastic, a plant that will grow anywhere, very adaptable, as well as lavender, which is grown throughout Europe. Very, very pretty, obviously smells really good. Use the flowers or the leaves to make yourself a nice soap, lotions, whatever. But it's interesting in that the flowers themselves are small enough for the smallest pollinators, for any insects that would like to use those flowers, and the lavender as well. So the lavender and the agastache have very small flowers, but it's for bigger bumblebees and for smaller bees, smaller hoverflies, wasps also that are predatory wasps. So by having a couple of different kinds of plants, now this is a purple flower. If we look around, we also have chèvrefeuille or honeysuckle, which is pink, which is valued by the hummingbirds, as well as also bigger bumblebees, especially the queens. We have rudbeckia behind us, which is basically a semi-wild, we didn't plant it, plant that basically takes over. And you can see it in many different colors. You can see it as yellow, smaller leaves, bigger leaves, also yellow, and kind of like this deep orange, burnt orange color, which is very, very cool. But all of these things add to the sort of the mystique, the magic of a kind of urban flower patch. Now this is obviously quite big. This is 6 50-foot beds, almost 700 square feet of just medicinal herbs and flowers. But in your own small gardens, it doesn't need to be that big. I mean, it can be 4 by 8. It can be 8 by 10. It doesn't matter. The point being that when you have all these flowering plants that flower at different times of year, or even flowering at the same time, you're able to attract as many insects as you can. And when the slugs come in, then you also have this wonderful sort of humid patch where the frogs and the toads would hang out and burrow underneath to be able to take care of those problems as well. And this is one of them that we have. Interesting that we talk about biodiversity, because this is obviously a cultivated biodiversity. But as you've been seeing photos or seeing video of our farm and our surrounding area all day, it's not just about biodiversity that we cultivate. It's also about biodiversity that we let just go wild. And the fact being that as important as it is to grow our own food in the best possible way, which is veganic, it is probably more important, or as important, but maybe even in my opinion more important, that we protect all the sacred lands we have left, all those lands that have been untouched by humans, all these lands around us. And so while we're doing what we can on the 6-acre parcel, it's not very big, and we only cultivate right now about a half an acre, we're doing everything that we can to reinstore biodiversity, make sure everybody who lives here has a wonderful home. We are also trying to protect over 3,000 hectares of land that basically this La Ferme de l'Aube is the epicenter of, because there's all those beings that live there that just deserve to live. So biodiversity in your gardens, but on a more scaling up, grander vision of what we should be doing as humans, is that we should just be protecting all the lands that haven't been touched, all the lands that have that maybe even have been touched. Like all of this land around us was logged 75 years ago, but it's now grown back up. It's not old growth, but it's grown back up. There are now wolves here, which shows that it's a habitat, it's an ecological system that has its top predator. And wherever we have that, these are lands that we should be protecting, wherever there are mountain lions, wherever. But it's not even only just that, it's wherever, any space where the wild population can exist, plant, animal, we should just allow to go. So, moral of the story, biodiversity in your garden, as many flower plants as you can. In this herb garden alone, 700 square feet, we have over 100 different kinds of flowering plants. And also wherever there are open spaces that haven't been touched by humans, whether it's on your own land that you happen to steward, or it's in lands that's owned by governments, these are lands that we should also be preserving for now and future generations of all peoples to share. So we're standing in the asparagus patch. Obviously it's all bolting, it's all going to flower, and it's finished for the season. We start harvesting in early May. Anybody who has asparagus knows, those spears are some of the first vegetables that we harvest and eat, and they're just lovely. They just seems to be so full of nutrients that we just eat our fill, but then at a certain point in time, it's enough, so we let it go, and it just creates this beautiful canopy again. For any creatures that want to live in there. There is a beetle called an asparagus beetle that I guess can be damaging to asparagus, but for ours, they just live in it. It's just like they just want to live symbiotically with it, just like the milkweed beetle wants to live symbiotically with the milkweed and is the plant that the monarch butterflies eat. Anyway, but behind me you'll see that we do also protect. This is what's called an invisible deer fence. From far away, you can actually see right through it, and you don't even notice the fence is there, which is kind of its charm as a fence. It is made out of nylon, so unfortunately it is another plastic product. But for us, we have a lot of deer, and there are places where there are a lot of deer. And the first year that I was here, this was our first garden, the one that we're standing in. It's 16 50-foot rows, 50 by 2.5 feet, so 125 square feet rows. And this was our first garden that we double dug, the John Jevons model of creating. And we had these beautiful kale plants and broccolis at the end of a very unsuccessful first season, because even though I knew what I was doing somewhat, the Veganics was new to me in 2015, and I can't say it was the greatest year, but at the end of the season, it was beautiful. We had beautiful broccoli plants, we had beautiful carrots. Everything was coming up just nice. And as I was looking into the forest, as you see here, that's grown up also quite big in 10 years, I saw these big doe eyes looking at me, and I could see what she was looking at. She was looking at my tender broccolis and carrots, tops, and I remember, because a monarch butterfly just passed, and I remember that because my philosophy was vegan, I really didn't want a fence. I said to the deer itself, I said, look, you know what, we don't hunt or kill you here. We just ask you that you don't do the same to the plants that we eat. We don't eat you. Please don't eat the plants that we eat. This was my little prayer I gave to the deer. She kind of looked at me, kind of waved her nose and shook her tail and took off. The next day, her and two of her friends came and basically ravaged the whole garden. So I was like, well, okay, prayers are all fine and good, and I guess I could do that my entire life as a veganic farmer, or I could decide to put up a fence. And that particular year, I read the Nearing's book, Helen and Scott Nearing's book, Living the Good Life. And when they were teaching people about gardening in Vermont at the time when they were living there, they had kind of a homestead community get-togethers on Saturdays. Very, very cool project. You should check out that book, Living the Good Life by the Nearing. They said that in order to have a garden in a place where you had deer, you need to put up a fence. And in my head, I was like, you know what? That just seems like good advice. So we put up the fence. We've never had any problems since. Saying that, never had any problems. We have had some problems. They do come in late, mid to late fall, and they do stomp down the fence to come in and eat the rest of the kale, which means that we don't have a lot of winter kale at the end of the season, but at that part of the year, we let them do what they want to do. There are also times when we have, you'll see that there's a hole chewed through the fence. That was a groundhog that has a burrow on the other side. Here's the fence here. Here's where she chewed it, if you can see it. But because there really isn't that much in here that we harvest after about mid-June, we just let her in and she comes and eats what she wants. Groundhogs are another big pressing problem that a lot of people have. For groundhogs specifically, if you live in their area, what we have found that to deter them, we kind of play pots and play spoons around their hole, and it kind of drives them to another burrow, because a groundhog never just has one burrow. They actually have probably 2 or 3. We like to think that this is her summer chalet or summer home, and that this isn't actually her permanent place to live. She wasn't around this year. I don't know why. But we did see some other groundhog earlier in the spring. Not sure if it was the same one that dug the hole through. So you can do that. But also we decided that, just like everything else we do, sometimes you just plant a little extra and you let them have a little bite. But in the end, she didn't really eat much other than the chamomile, so I guess she really needed like a relaxation tea. But she never bothered the asparagus or didn't eat the camarees, which is something we harvest quite great in here. So the moral of the story, if you live in a place with deer, it really is a good idea to put up a fence. We're not fans, and with Certified Veganic, we don't approve electric fences. We're not entirely sure of the damage that it inflicts on their nervous systems. Whereas the deer fence, it doesn't hurt them. And when they poke their noses and they feel it, they'll actually rub along it, trying to find an opening. It's very funny to watch them do it, because they kind of think that there is going to be an opening at some point. But after maybe 50 feet or so, they get deterred and they go away. So it's one of the bigger problems we have. I talked about earlier about mice and voles and shrews. These creatures can be very damaging to basically our little seedlings. But it's something that we also haven't had a big problem with, even though they exist, even though that we see them all the time. We do have a fair number of gopher snakes in our field, so it's possible that that's taking care of a big mice problem. We do have owls as well, and we have found like owl pellets, which is basically their regurgitated bones and fur of whatever they had eaten the night before. So we know that they do come and hunt the fields. However, for the most part, we don't do anything other than let them live. And only once in the 11 years that we've been here did we have a problem with shrews eating probably half of our brassica plantings, one of our succession plantings. And yet it was only because we happened to plant right over their home. So in the end, if you think about your gardening space, and I talk about this in the Veganic Grower's Handbook, that maybe there are some places that we shouldn't be cultivating at all. I think it's really important that before you break new ground, that you actually understand who's living there before you decide to put the food that you need. Not saying that you shouldn't garden anywhere that you live, you should, but there are better places than others to put your garden space. And it's really important to be cognizant of everyone before you plant. This is our hand-dug pond. It's basically 40 by 50 feet, so 2,000 square feet, and 6 feet deep. It holds 150,000 cubic liters of water when it's full. When it started, it was just basically a sand bottom. There were a couple of different options, 3 different options for layering it. I could have either done natural clay, which I didn't have access to, and trying to figure that out was difficult. I could have used a rubber liner, which is basically like a pond liner, which is what people would use, but it was very expensive and very heavy. Or I could have used just a kind of an 8mm piece of plastic, which is a heavier duty plastic, just so that the water would stay. So that's what I did. There's a good drone picture in my book. And if you took the Learn Veganic course, there's a good picture of it there also, of about 2018, where it was just basically a watering hole with black plastic. Well, that's not really what I intended, and that's not really what I wanted. On the outside, it was quite wild, but on the inside, it was just that kind of ugly black plastic, and it wasn't very fun. I could swim in it, but it wasn't that interesting. So what I decided to do every year when we're creating our beds again, or we're preparing some of our fields, there's always sort of mats of herb, wild herb that tries to encroach on the beds that we take out. So wheelbarrow by wheelbarrow, I started backfilling the pond. And now what we have is all of these wonderful wild plants. We have dragonflies flying around. We have cattails that came from about a kilometer away by the birds. We have just this amazing water aquatic wildlife habitat. And we have snapping turtles that live in here that lay their eggs on the shore. There are 3 different species of frogs that live in the vicinity. We have dragonflies that are here. The frogs also lay their eggs, and we have baby tadpoles, and so then we have more frogs. Of course, it also creates mosquito habitat, which is unfortunate, but mosquitoes are eaten by dragonfly, and mosquito larvae is eaten by dragonfly larvae, so it creates, again, a system in balance of having a water system. But having any kind of water source is going to bring all sorts of characters that you don't understand. We have swallows that come. We have bats that fly over. Last night while we were all camping together, we heard the whippoorwills calling, which will fly over our fields to eat the mosquitoes that were coming out and trying to eat us when we were having a fire last night. So yeah, anywhere where you could put a little water source is going to increase. Now, some people have asked me, well, what if I put it right in the center of my garden? And I think, yeah, sure. I think that's a fantastic idea. Go ahead and put a little water source. There's a way to create, you dig a little hole, you can put a plastic liner, you can use a bucket. Even better would be to find a nice clay source and make a nice clay environment to actually capture and hold the water. This wasn't even a natural low area. It just so happened to be a place where the ground kind of leveled out, and it just seemed like a good place. We use it not just for wildlife habitat, rainwater collection, because all of this is refilled from rainwater collection that comes off the house as well as our barn, but it's also our water source when we need to irrigate the fields. We actually have a pump that goes into the water. Because it's so important as a wildlife ecological habitat now, we never let it get too low. But even when it does get low enough, it's interesting how different species start using it. Now it's a little high, so we have less skunk activity coming to drink. We have less raccoons coming to drink. But when it's a little lower, they like to put their little paws in there and maybe have a little bath. So it's well-rounded. We've seen the deer around here. I'm not so sure if the wolves have come, but they might have. And yeah, and as you can see, it's just become a natural part of our sort of philosophy of rewilding. We're here again in another flower garden because this is just to inspire you to be ultimately curious, not just about the bigger part of our natural world, not just about the biggest trees or mushroom picking or wild foraging or big mammals or small mammals or birds or frogs, but also our little helpers, our little friends, are the insects. I mean, they're so phenomenal. If you stop, smell the flower, and look inside, something will hop away, bounce off, fly off, and they're fascinating. I mean, the three of us today have just been walking around, and there's been insects flying around us, jumping on us, being around us all the time, and the colors are just fascinating, and they're just misunderstood. You know, we look at it as like, oh, there's an ant in my kitchen, we gotta spray for it, or oh no, I have something eating my kale, I need to spray for it, or I have something eating my broccoli, I need to do something about it. It's like, well, no, actually, they're there for a reason. And to take it even further, just like we are all there for our own reasons, they are there for their own reasons. And it's sort of one of those little blessings of life that they exist for themselves. We are able to live in their world. This world is propelled by insects. There are many crops that we wouldn't have if we didn't have pollinating insects. So embrace them. Enjoy their company. Most of them aren't trying to pick you or bite you or scratch you. Most of them are just there, just hanging out, living, waiting to be observed. Maybe, and the interesting part, especially in the case of, say, like dragonflies, when they land on you, they're looking at you. They want to know, they're curious about you. We might go to the river later and go swim, which is not that far from us here, and they will land on your hand and just kind of stare at you. Like, hey, what are you doing? What's your deal? I think it's time that we start looking at our entire world as something that is always in balance, it's always in harmony, that is always there for its own purpose. You know, if we're looking at the vegan philosophy, if we're looking at the vegan ethic of gardening, of farming, if we're looking at the veganic principle, the no spray philosophy, we're looking at our world as one where everyone can live together in peace. I mean, yes, okay, there are insects that eat other insects, there are animals that eat other animals. As humans, we don't have to, and we shouldn't, and we don't need to, and ethically, morally, it's wrong. There are some other creatures that do, but there are a lot of creatures that don't, that they just chew on plants. Let them chew on a few of your garden plants, observe them, see what happens. And I think in a lot of ways, it might just make us more understanding as a race of people, as humans. It might just make us more compassionate to look at everyone in our world and just wish them to have a good life and to live as they wish to do. I think in a lot of ways, that's the final point of this whole tour, is that we've tried to create something that doesn't really mimic nature. It doesn't. I mean, garlic doesn't grow in rows in nature. Blueberries do grow in this kind of environment, so it does mimic nature a little bit. Corn doesn't grow in the rows. Corn doesn't grow wild in nature. but yet we can grow our own food, bring the wild into it, try to create biodiversity, protect everything that we have left, do all those things we can, do it in the best possible way that we can, and maybe, just maybe, in the end, we are put on this earth to make the world a better place. And Veganics, the no spray principle, protecting all the sacred lands we have left, is absolutely the way we can.